afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming at such a late hour. But I think it's important. That we shed some light on the issue that is of considerable urgency. Namely, the global humanitarian crisis continues to spiral out of control. That is why we have dedicated this third European Humanitarian Forum, the gathering of global humanitarian community that we host every year here in Brussels. We have dedicated it to growing tsunami, as I called it, of humanitarian need. And our humanitarian system can hardly keep up with that. In 2023, we witnessed the highest number of active armed conflicts since the end of the Second World War. And these conflicts are becoming more protracted and more complex. They are taking place mostly away from public attention. And on top of this, last year we saw some of the worst climate-related disasters that also have, and increasingly so, a humanitarian impact. So that today, around 300 million people are in need of humanitarian aid globally, while the funding gap between the needs and available resources has grown to over 50 billion euros. That is why the 2024 edition of the European Humanitarian Forum was primarily a loud call to action. Action foremost depending on political will. Therefore, we called on governments to fulfill their humanitarian responsibilities in the EU as well as beyond, in line with their economic capabilities. Because we believe firmly that humanitarian aid is a global responsibility that has to be shared equitably. During this forum, I have thus outlined three key actions that we believe must be taken collectively. That is, if we really effectively want to provide a lifeline to most vulnerable. First, there is a need to increase funding. It is a sad fact that three top humanitarian donors, including the European Commission, are providing nearly 60% of globally available humanitarian funding. And yesterday, together, Commission and the EU member states, we have pledged 7.7 billion euros. With this initial figure for humanitarian aid in 2024, the European Union is reconfirming its continued commitment to the humanitarian causes around the world. And yet, the global humanitarian crisis is not just about funding. There is a terrible trend of brazen defying of international humanitarian law in conflicts. And it is conflicts which continue to be the key driver of humanitarian needs. That is why, as a second point, we have put the discussions on how to turn this terrible trend around, the trend of disrespecting the rules of war. After all, it is this framework which protects civilians and enables humanitarian action in the first place. Last year, there were more civilian casualties in conflict than any year since 2019. Therefore, we urge the governments to speak up in a unified call for increased respect of international humanitarian law and for accountability of the perpetrators of the violations of the international humanitarian law. And the third and final point I have made during the forum is that we must also try to reduce the humanitarian needs in the first place. For that, a more joined-up action is necessary, an action that would address and solve those crises sustainably by addressing the root causes of them. Our humanitarian support must therefore be accompanied with development and peace efforts, so as to help lift the vulnerable communities out from fragility. In short, I called for more funding, more respect of the law, and more joined-up action as the way ahead. And I'm proud that over the past 3 years, this forum has grown into an important space where donors, partners, and beneficiaries can come together to to exchange frankly and openly on how to address key humanitarian challenges. And now is the time to turn these reflections into action. I wish to thank the Belgian Presidency of the Council for excellent cooperation in putting together this third humanitarian forum, and we are already looking forward to the next edition next year to be organized between the Commission and the incoming Polish Presidency of the Council. Thank you.
Minister, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Janez, to co-host this important European Humanitarian Forum. We were more than happy to do our share because, as you stated, humanitarian needs worldwide are unprecedented. And the last 2 days clearly proved that there's a large international humanitarian community that cares. And that's why I think it's so important that we had two main topics on the agenda. The funding gap, you referred to it, and I think it's good that we had a considerable amount already pledged, but also the focus on forgotten and underfunded crisis. I think it's important that beyond the news lines, we are well aware of the fact that a lot of humanitarian dire situations are not always at the forefront, nor of the political agenda, nor of the news and the headlines. So I think it's important to state again that Belgium is doing its part by being a significant, consistent and very principled donor. I think also it's important that as a humanitarian community we focus aid on complex crises like the Sahel, the Great Lakes region, the Palestinian territories or Syria. That was an important topic also to be discussed the last couple of days. The total Belgian humanitarian budget for 2024 is 190 million euros, and the vast majority of our geographical priorities are considered as forgotten crises. And Belgium will be allocating nearly 40% of its budget to forgotten crises in 2024. But as the Commissioner already stated, we need money, we need pledges, but I also think that we need more. We need a clear political commitment for tackling humanitarian crisis worldwide. 75 years ago, the Geneva Conventions were adopted to preserve a minimum of humanity in wars. And we all agreed that even in wars there should be rules. But unfortunately we are witnessing a growing trend of total disrespect for these rules. Every 8 minutes a woman is sexually assaulted or raped in eastern Congo. Every 10 minutes a child dies in Gaza. And humanitarian workers are under attack in record numbers. We have the responsibility to call upon everyone, states, persons or groups, to fully respect and comply with international humanitarian law wherever, whenever. For instance, in Gaza, I think it's important that we state again and again, it doesn't matter how you call it, but the weapons need to be silenced. Let's go for an immediate ceasefire. And tomorrow a European Council takes place, so I think it's important also to call for concrete action. And the following questions should be on the table. What will we do to obtain that ceasefire? What will we do to prevent an attack on Rafah? What will we do to get hostages out? What will we do to stop the starvation of children? I think that it's important also as an international community that we draw red lines. In the DRC, one of the main panels throughout the forum, we put the humanitarian crisis in eastern Congo on the agenda, and we all know the devastating numbers of refugees, women raped, children enlisted in armed groups, and I think it was very clear that the international community takes up the responsibility to not forget about the plight of the people there. Belgium, of course, will continue to do its part in making sure humanitarian aid reaches those in need and in the fight against gender-based violence. And I would hereby like to highlight the amazing work of the Global Survivors Fund, an organization that helps survivors of sexual violence with reparation, holding perpetrators to account, and we have supported their work since 2020. We will continue to do so. Another issue that should be brought to the table, to the political leaders in DRC and Rwanda, they have a responsibility to act, to put a stop to violence, to this hell on earth. What will they do to stop the siege of Goma? What will they do to stop the sexual violence? What will they do to protect every civilian or refugee in the region? So yes, we are engaged in the humanitarian system. Yes, we need more money, but I also think it's important that we need clear political action in favour of the respect of international humanitarian law. As humanitarian donors, let that be the takeaway of this conference, this forum. We must act now, because if we don't have the courage to save children's lives all over the world, we are not worth doing politics. Thank you.
Many thanks, Minister. Thank you, Commissioner. We now have time for a few questions. I would ask, as usual, that you state your name and media before posing your question. We'll start here in the room. S'il vous plaît, Odile.
Oui, merci. Odile Harvey pour Radio Nord-Bretagne. Tout d'abord, félicitations à tous les humanitaires qui font un travail extraordinaire dans des conditions extrêmement difficiles. Félicitations aussi d'avoir organisé cette série de forums auxquels j'ai participé hier. Et j'ai beaucoup parlé avec les bénéficiaires. Et les bénéficiaires, qu'ils soient d'Afrique, d'Amérique latine ou d'ailleurs, ont tous mentionné le rôle des armes et disaient finalement pourquoi la communauté internationale n'essaie pas de réduire les trafics d'armes et les envois d'armes dans tous ces pays, et de ce fait, il y aurait moins besoin aussi d'aide humanitaire, puisqu'en plus on a un problème de financement. Comment vous voyez ça?
Okay. The fact is that a large majority of humanitarian needs in the world are caused by conflicts, about 80% or so. The rest are due to natural and other disasters. But yes, overwhelming majority of humanitarian needs are a direct consequence of armed conflict. And armed conflict can only take place with the arms, obviously. That's why, indeed, yes, stricter control over the arm exports would be in order. As you know, European Commission does not export arms and does not have competences in this area. This is the area that is the competence of member states.
Minister, anything to add?
Vous avez complètement raison, c'est ce qu'on a entendu les 2 derniers jours, et c'est très clair que les besoins humanitaires ne vont qu'augmenter dans un monde avec beaucoup de conflits, c'est comme le commissaire l'a dit, et c'est très clair, c'est un appel aussi aux pays, si on veut moins donner aux besoins humanitaires, il ne faut pas exporter d'armes vers des pays qui sont en guerre, qui sont en conflit armé. Ça, c'est très, très clair.
Merci beaucoup. We'll turn now to questions online. We have a question from Suniva. Please go ahead, Suniva.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Suniva Rose from The National. This morning at the Humanitarian Forum, I spoke to NGOs that told me that they were specifically asking the EU to review the trade agreement with Israel due to fears of human rights violations in Israel. I know it's been under discussion, and there was a request by Belgium and Spain. I also understand that on Monday at the Foreign Affairs Council discussion, there was some opposition from member states. Could you maybe tell us about whether you expect these discussions to move forward at the European Council in the coming days at all? And if you can't even agree to that request from NGOs on Gaza, I mean, what can the EU do to put any pressure on Israel? Thank you.
Well, there has been a clear question, a letter that has been sent by the Spanish and the Irish Prime Ministers to Commissioner von der Leyen to review the association agreement in terms of the human rights clause in Article 2. I understood that the High Representative launched the discussion on Monday, and it is clear that we, as a Belgian government, we want to review to be taken into account. But of course, everybody knows that all member states have to agree. But it's a clear question that has been posed to the President of the European Commission, and I think that when we are serious in promoting the human rights-based approach, also in humanitarian issues and in conflicts, well, it should be under review also when we have human rights clauses in association agreements.
Many thanks. Our next question is from Paula at Politico. Unfortunately, she's having some connection issues. I'm going to read the question and then you can respond. Her question is, what should the EU do to ensure international humanitarian law is not disrespected? In Gaza, Israel keeps blocking access of life-saving aid, and the IPC report has flagged that half the population will face famine by July. If international pressure is not enough to compel Israel to open roads for humanitarian aid and reach a ceasefire, what can? Please.
The European Commission has been calling for unimpeded access for humanitarian aid since day one of this escalation in the Middle East. And we continue to do so. Most recently, again, in the joint statement that we issued with High Representative Borrell, we again called for opening of additional land routes into Gaza. This is the most efficient and fastest way to address the looming famine in Gaza. So this is what we can do. This is what we are doing. We are in contact with our Israeli counterparts, and we are pointing to the need to radically increase the supplies of humanitarian aid into Gaza without delay.
Commissioner or Minister?
I didn't make promotion so far, but I totally agree with the Commissioner. So what we are witnessing is starvation in massive numbers, in a man-made catastrophe. So, of course, we are doing everything that we can, sea corridors, air droppings, but the most effective way to get humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip and people who might die out of hunger or thirst is opening humanitarian access from more entry points, not only from Rafah or Kerem Shalom, but also from Karni or Erez in the north. Because in the north, the situation is most dire. 400,000 people are trapped there without any humanitarian supplies. Thus, the international community has to stay firm and has to make sure that Israel allows more humanitarian aid to get in. If not, we are all complicit.
Many thanks to you both. I see no further questions here in the press room, nor online. So at this point, we can draw this press conference to a close. Many thanks to the Commissioner and the Minister for their participation. Huge thanks, as always, to our amazing interpreters and our SBP technical staff for the work they do to keep the show on the road. Thank you and good afternoon.